can you get that bottle of water for me? Thanks. I'll edit that out of the tape here in just a minute. So fears and depressions come right on the heels of this demonic spirit of deception. Then we come to number 7, and I see this, what the Lord spoke to me is it's an embrace of spirits of obsession, compulsion, and addiction. And what I believe is that there are things that go on in people that you become compelled. It's the beginnings of a demonic control on your life. Addictions that you can't break on your own, compulsions, you're doing things compulsively. Some of those things might even look good at the beginning. You know, washing your hands is good, but if you're washing your hands 100 times a day, then you'll actually wear the skin right off your hands. You know, compulsion for doing things like even fasting. You know, fasting can be good when done led by the Spirit, but eating disorders are not too far from that, you know, so if that's a compulsion. And then there's obsessions, obsession with someone else as a person. You've fallen madly in love with someone and they have absolutely no interest or no even ability to love you because they're involved in another relationship. We've actually counseled people like that were just obsessed with someone else. And so how do you break those chains and open the lock to let them out? Those are the things that we'll see in just a minute. Number 8 is a smothering brace of control. And I believe that there are spirits of control that come on people to control what they do, control what they say, but also to use them to control other people around them. You know, part of what the devil wants to do is he's always wanted to assume the authority in the place of God. And so he wants to control people. He wants to control situations. And then the 9th is the suppression of your identity. This is the embrace of a spirit that comes and suppresses your identity and begins to implant his own identity and his own expressions in you. So that's the 9 embraces, and it ends up what we would classically call demonic possession, which I think is a misnomer. It's not a good term. I don't believe it's possession per se. I believe it's being demonized, where a demonic spirit comes and expresses his personality through your life. And that can be to different levels, by the way. It's not all that you're just writhing is the word, individual on the floor spitting and cursing and all that. It's not just that. It can be his expression of his personality in a lot of ways through you. And so, anyway, how do you come against those last 5? I mean, they seem so horrible. How many of you guys can identify friends or even in your own life in the past that you've been in those things? I can identify in my own life things that, you know, I've had in my life. And friends, and you can pretty much look at the list and find, you know, right kind of where they are in this progression of things. And so how can you be used by God to really help break that free? And here's what the Lord spoke to me about that. And this is one of the great things about this encounter I had with the Lord in the tent. Is the Lord told me, He said, when you come against a situation where someone is in these 9 embraces, somewhere in the progression, He said, don't worry about coming directly against the last 5. He said, you can spend a lot of time and a lot of effort in coming against those last 5, but that's very seldom really productive. And what He told me is go back to the root and come against the original offense. And He said, actually, the first 4 where their will was really engaged in embracing those things. So the first 4 would be a spirit of offense, where they embraced that. They made the choice to embrace offense instead of doing what the Bible commands us to do and forgive one another our offenses. They made the choice to believe the lie and the deception that came to them when the Spirit came and started reinterpreting things to them. You know, I believe there are people that almost feel like they have an inside track on situations. It's almost like a spirit of illumination, but it never creates and does good things. It's always producing death. And it's because it's a demonic spirit, but it gives you almost this rush that you have inside knowledge, that you have an awareness that others don't have. And I believe that's at times a hard one for people to really give up, because they like the fact that they've got some hidden knowledge. It's a rush they get, you know, when they feel like, oh, I understand it all now. But they don't realize that what they've just been fed is demonic lies that all they do is strengthen the other areas of destruction in their life. Okay? So, and then helping people come against accusation and judgment. Renounce those things. Renounce your accusations. Renounce the judgments that you've had against people in your life. And then the last one is to break off bitterness and to renounce bitterness. You know, I think that at times bitterness can come to the point of almost being a lifestyle for some people. It can be almost like a drug in itself that helps them cope with all the pain they've gone through. And so they just get so bitter and believe that their life, that's what their life is all about. They get even bitter towards God, bitter towards people around them. You know, people that should have loved them didn't love them. And so it's almost like they are clothing themselves with and wrapping themselves in this bitterness. Well, here's the thing that I began to do is I began to see that if you can just get people to come back to that original thing, well, then how do you really help them do that? How can you really help people come back to the original thing if they maybe don't even recognize this whole progression? And what I found is that the Lord will give you words of knowledge about situations and circumstances at the opportune moment to help them come to freedom. Now, I'll give you an example of how that has happened a couple of times. One was in some meetings that we were at, and a girl had just come forward to give her heart to the Lord. But even there while she's standing there, there's just something on her. You can just see it. And someone came forward, and this was actually in a kind of an old line Pentecostal church. Someone came forward and started praying for her, and she fell on the ground and started manifesting a demonic presence. This demon just came to the surface, took over, and she's cursing God, and spitting and writhing like a snake on the floor. Well, in this old line Pentecostal church, immediately a whole team of women just pounced on her. You know, one on her each arm and one on each leg, and somebody there and right in her face, and they're doing the old stuff, you know, screaming. You know, reminds me of that commercial about the stain remover. Shout it out, you know. That's what they were trying to do, is shout these things out. Well, you know, we've seen that. I've seen that since the time I was growing up, and I can tell you that's not productive. It's not the way to do it. Don't get into a shouting match with the devil. You know, I often wonder if it's not demonic manifestation shouting. You know, your anger is not from God. I wonder about that sometimes. Maybe you're just letting something else manifest. So, anyway, I decided because these women had gotten a hold of this girl, I was not going to have anything to do with that. So I just went about my business, and I was praying for other people, and they were just over in one corner of the church, and you could hear them all night just going at it, you know, and just screaming and shouting, and nothing was happening. In fact, I'm just finishing up with the last person that I had to pray for, and the church is now emptying out, and all of a sudden I get a word of knowledge for the girl that's manifesting the demonic spirit. And right then, my brother-in-law Jim came up to me and he said, "Dennis, can you help this girl? They've not gotten anywhere with her. Can you help her?" And all of a sudden I just gotten this word of knowledge, two things actually that came to me for her. And so I said to Jim, "Yes, I can." And so we went over there, and of course the women are still, you know, pinning her to the floor, and she's struggling, and it's like a wrestling match, you know, WWF right there in the church. And so the first thing I did was I looked at all these women, and, you know, I don't mean to belittle them. They're doing everything they could, and their hearts were right in wanting to do the right thing, but they just had never been trained in really other ways to do this. But I just felt like for me to do anything with this girl at all, I had to ask them to leave. And I hope they didn't embrace the spirit of offense because of that. But I looked at them and I said, you know, I need you guys to just leave us alone. And so it ended up with myself and my brother-in-law Jim Drown and another brother that was there with us. And so we're, you know, in fact, it's Brian Briault. Some of you know Brian. And so we're in this meeting, and this woman now, the girl, she's actually a woman, but a young woman, on the floor is manifesting a demonic lust spirit. I mean, we're trying to just even lay a hand on her head or whatever, and she starts rubbing our arms and the whole thing. And the Lord just spoke so clear to me and said, "Don't look on the outward, but look at me and look on the heart." And so I just decided to ignore all that. And I felt like the Lord gave me instruction right away of how to start this. And so I said to the girl, "Look at me." And, of course, as soon as I did that, the demonic response is to close your eyes as tight as you can. And that's what she did. She closed her eyes as tight as she could close her eyes. I mean, her whole face scrunched up to close her eyes. It's funny how the demonic spirits always overreact, isn't it? But anyway, so she's there with her eyes so tightly closed. She's got her whole face scrunched. And I'm saying, well, Lord, what do I do now? And so, again, he told me the same thing I'd heard for the lady in this other meeting. He said, tell her that if she doesn't work with you, you're going to have to leave her like she is. And I just said to this woman, if you don't work with me, I'm going to have to leave you like you are. And she still has demonic manifestations going on, but then all of a sudden this little plaintive voice spoke out and said, don't leave me, I need help. And that was the lady talking. Okay? She could talk through all this demonic control and all this other stuff, and she spoke through that. I'm sure it must have taken an effort for her to break through and speak, but she said, don't leave me, I need help. And I believe that's why she originally came forward to accept Christ as her Savior, because she was there because she knew she needed help. And so I said, then you will look at me. You fight this thing, and you look at me right now. And you could see her just struggle, and finally she opened her eyes and looked at me. And I mean, for her to be able to do that, it took effort. There was demonic force and power on her to keep her eyes closed. And so she had to fight that to get her eyes to even open.